At my daughter's luxury wedding I was forced to sit alone in the back. Your poverty will embarrass us, her groom sneered. Suddenly a man in an expensive suit sat beside me. Act like you're with me. When my daughter saw us together, she went pale. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The invitation had described the venue as a modern cathedral of light and glass, and for once the hyperbole was justified. The wedding was being held in a starkly beautiful architectural marvel, a place of soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city from a godlike vantage point. It was a temple built to the worship of money, a perfect setting for the union of my daughter Chloe, and the man who had convinced her that wealth was a substitute for worth. I had made the dress I was wearing. It was a simple sheath-style dress of deep sapphire silk, a color that I knew brought out the flecks of gold in my eyes. It was elegant, understated, and it had cost me nothing but a week of my time and the pleasure of the craft. As I stepped out of the taxi and into the river of guests flowing into the venue, I felt a profound and alienating sense of otherness. The women around me were clad in the armor of the season's top designers, their gowns shimmering with a desperate competitive luminescence. Their jewelry was not an accent, it was a statement of net worth. Chloe was waiting just inside the grand entrance, a vision in a white gown so laden with pearls and crystals that it seemed to possess its own gravitational pull. She was beautiful, breathtakingly so, but her smile when she saw me was a tight, painful slash of social anxiety. It did not reach her eyes. "Mother," she said, her voice a low, urgent hiss. She kissed the air beside my cheek, her scent a complex and expensive perfume I didn't recognize. "You came. You invited me, sweetheart," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. She didn't seem to hear me. Her eyes were darting over my simple dress, my single strand of pearls, my late husband's wedding gift, and my hair which I had styled myself. I saw a flicker of the emotion I had been dreading, not love, not happiness, but a deep, corrosive shame. Before I could say more, she was flagging down a wedding planner, a severe-looking woman with a headset and a clipboard. "Eleanor will take you to your seat, Mother." She gave my arm a brief, brittle squeeze. "Enjoy the ceremony," and with that, she turned away, swallowed by a wave of her new, more important friends. As I stood there, a small, quiet island in a sea of glittering sharks, Marcus Thorne, the groom, materialized at my side. He was handsome in a way that felt machine-tooled, his tuxedo fitting his athletic frame with a kind of sterile perfection. His smile was all teeth. He leaned in close, his cologne a sharp, aggressive scent. His voice was a venomous whisper, meant for my ears alone. "We've put you in the back," he sneered, the words a spray of poison. "Your poverty will embarrass us." The cruelty of it was so pure, so unadorned, that it almost took my breath away. It was not an emotional outburst. It was a strategic decision. A piece of social engineering designed to quarantine a liability. The planner, Eleanor, gave me a tight, sympathetic smile that was somehow worse than Marcus's sneer. "This way, Mrs. Maybank," she said, her voice professionally neutral. She led me on a long walk of shame. We passed the front rows filled with the Thorne family and their powerful political allies. We passed the tables of Chloe's society friends, their curious, pitying glances like tiny, stinging insects. We walked past the band, past the towering 10-tiered wedding cake. We walked until we reached the very back of the vast hall, to a small, solitary table tucked away in a dimly lit corner. It was partially obscured by a monstrous floral arrangement of white orchids, a beautiful, fragrant prison wall. "Here you are," the planner said, her job complete. I sat down. The table was set for one. From my lonely vantage point, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire spectacle. I saw my daughter take her place at the altar. I saw her look at Marcus with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. I saw the life I had given her, the values I had tried to instill in her, integrity, compassion, the quiet strength of self-worth, all of it, rendered invisible, irrelevant, embarrassing. I did not weep. I did not feel the hot flush of anger. I felt a profound, tectonic sorrow. The kind of grief one feels for a thing that is not dead but has been willingly, irrevocably lost. My husband David had always said my heart was my greatest asset. I had come to this wedding to see if our daughter had inherited it. The test had begun, and in the first 5 minutes the preliminary results were in, and they were devastating. The ceremony was a masterpiece of performative piety and financial exhibitionism. A string quartet played softly as a progressive media-friendly minister spoke of love and partnership in vague inspirational platitudes. Marcus and Chloe exchanged vows. They had clearly not written themselves, their voices resonating with a practiced sincerity that felt hollow even from 100 feet away. They were not two people beginning a life together. They were two corporations announcing a merger, and this was their press conference. I watched it all with the detached, analytical calm that had been the hallmark of my professional life. I saw the subtle, almost invisible transactions of power. The way Marcus's father, a brutish man with a politician's smile, clasped the hand of a senator in the front row. The way Chloe's new mother-in-law subtly angled her massive diamond ring to catch the light. It was a world of surfaces, and they were all polished to a flawless, blinding sheen. When the ceremony concluded and the reception began, my isolation became even more pronounced. Waiters, moving with a synchronized balletic grace, descended upon the room with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate hors d'oeuvre. None of them came to my table. It was as if a force field of social insignificance emanated from my corner, rendering me invisible. I sat with my back straight, my hands folded in my lap, a portrait of quiet dignity that I knew was being interpreted as pathetic loneliness. I was a ghost at my own daughter's feast, a silent, spectral reminder of a past she was desperate to erase. It was then that I saw him. He entered the room, not from the main entrance, but from a side door near the front, as if he belonged to a different, more exclusive category of guest. He was a man in his early 60s, tall and lean, with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard and the kind of deep, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at a single glance. He was wearing a bespoke suit of dark charcoal gray wool, a garment of such exquisite, understated craftsmanship that it made every other man in the room, including the groom, look like a boy in a rental. He did not pause. He did not mingle. He moved with a kind of serene, purposeful gravity, and as he did, a strange phenomenon occurred. The room seemed to tilt on its axis, ever so slightly, towards him. Powerful men, the senators and CEOs in the front rows, saw him, and a look of something between deference and alarm flickered across their faces. They started to rise from their seats, to move towards him, but he gave them a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a gesture that was not a request but a command. He continued his deliberate, unhurried walk. He passed the head table where Marcus and Chloe were accepting the fawning congratulations of their court. He passed Marcus's parents. He passed all the tables of all the important people. His path was a straight, unwavering line, and it was aimed directly at the back of the room. It was aimed directly at me. My heart began to beat a little faster. I had no idea who this man was. He arrived at my small, forgotten table and stopped. He looked down at me, his expression one of polite, unreadable neutrality. And then he did something that sent a ripple of shock through the carefully managed social ecosystem of the room. He pulled out the empty chair opposite me and sat down. He leaned forward slightly, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. He looked directly into my eyes. "My name is Silas," he said, as if we were old friends meeting in a quiet cafe. "Forgive the intrusion, but for the next few hours I need you to act like you're with me." The first dance was a carefully orchestrated spectacle. As the band slid into a soft romantic ballad, a spotlight descended from the heavens, encasing Chloe and Marcus in a luminous angelic bubble. They moved across the dance floor with a practiced, flawless grace. Chloe's head resting on Marcus's shoulder, her eyes closed in a perfect imitation of blissful surrender. She was playing the part of the fairy tale princess, and she was playing it to perfection. From my distant table, I watched the performance, a silent, uninvited critic in the back row of the theater. Silas sat opposite me, his presence a quiet, solid enigma. We had exchanged no more than a few pleasantries. He had a way of being still that was more powerful than any amount of conversation. Halfway through the dance, Chloe's eyes fluttered open. Her gaze, I knew, was not for her new husband. It was for her audience. She was scanning the room, checking on her guests, ensuring that every element of her perfect production was in its place. Her eyes swept past the front tables, a serene, queenly smile on her face. Then her gaze traveled to the back of the room, to my corner, and her smile froze. It was as if she had been slapped, the serene, blissful expression on her face shattered, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Her body stiffened in Marcus's arms, her movements suddenly clumsy and out of sync with the music. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the man sitting with me. She didn't know who Silas was. She couldn't have. But in her world, The world of surfaces and status that she had so desperately fought to join. A man like Silas was an unmistakable signal. His suit, his posture, the almost invisible aura of power that clung to him like a bespoke cologne. It all screamed one word: important. He was a somebody, a major player, the kind of man whose presence at your wedding was a social coup. And he was sitting with her mother. Her poor, embarrassing, simple living mother who was supposed to be hidden away like a dirty secret. The carefully managed optics of her perfect day were not just ruined. They were inverted. The narrative she had so carefully crafted of her glamorous, powerful new family and her quaint, irrelevant old one was being publicly contradicted. A man of his stature should have been at the head table, fawning over her and Marcus. He should not under any circumstances be seen in a quiet, intense conversation with the woman she had deemed unworthy of a seat at her own wedding. I saw her whisper something frantic and urgent into Marcus's ear. He followed her panicked gaze to our table. I saw his jaw tighten, a muscle twitching in his cheek. The smooth, confident mask of the triumphant groom slipped, revealing the raw, insecure fury beneath. The dance ended. The applause was thunderous, but neither Chloe nor Marcus seemed to hear it. They stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, their perfect spotlight now feeling like an interrogation lamp. Their eyes were locked on our table, their faces a mixture of confusion, rage, and a dawning, terrible fear. The scene they had tried so hard to avoid was happening, but it was not a scene of my making. It was a scene of their own profound and as yet uncalculated misjudgment. The moment the dance was over, the carefully constructed facade of the happy couple shattered. Chloe, her face pale and tight with a barely suppressed hysteria, pulled Marcus towards the head table. Her movements were sharp, angry, her grip on his arm like a vice. I couldn't hear their words, but I could read the language of their bodies. It was the frantic, blame-filled argument of two co-conspirators whose perfect crime had just gone horribly, inexplicably wrong. Marcus, his face a thundercloud of bruised ego, broke away from her. He was a man whose authority had been publicly challenged at the very moment of his coronation, and he was not accustomed to it. He saw Silas's presence not as a social mystery but as a direct, personal affront. A man of power had ignored him, the groom, the new king, and had chosen to sit with the court jester. It was an insult he could not abide. His first instinct was to reassert his dominance. He snapped his fingers, a gesture of such crass new money vulgarity that it made me flinch. The severe-looking wedding planner Eleanor materialized at his side instantly, her face a mask of professional calm. Marcus did not lower his voice. He wanted the nearby tables to hear, to witness his command. "There's a man at the back table with the bride's mother," he said, his voice dripping with arrogant indignation. "He's clearly confused. Go and tell him that Mr. and Miss Thorne would be honored if he would join us at a more prominent table." The message was clear. It was a summons, a royal command disguised as a polite invitation. It was designed to remind the stranger of the proper hierarchy of this universe. A universe in which Marcus was the sun and all other bodies were expected to orbit him. The planner, a consummate professional, navigated the tables with practiced ease. She arrived at our corner, her expression a careful mixture of apology and deference. "Mr. Blackwood, sir?" she began, her voice a respectful murmur. She at least seemed to know his name. "My name is Eleanor. Mr. Thorne, the groom has noticed you from across the room. He and the bride would be so honored if you would join them and their family at the head table." Silas did not look at her. He had been in the middle of a quiet observation about the architectural integrity of the building. He simply paused, took a slow, deliberate sip of his water and then, without turning his head, replied. His voice was not loud, but it carried an authority that was absolute. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. The planner froze. The words were not rude, but they were a complete and total shutdown. They were the words of a man who does not receive summonses, but who issues them. They brooked no argument. She stood there for a moment, flustered, her professional playbook utterly devoid of a response for such a quiet, unyielding refusal. "Of course, sir," she finally stammered, and then retreated, her brisk walk now looking more like a panicked scuttle. I watched her deliver the news to Marcus. I saw his face flush a deep, ugly red. He had been publicly rebuffed. He had sent his emissary to a foreign power, and the emissary had been sent back. His terms rejected. The entire head table and several of the surrounding tables had witnessed the exchange. They had witnessed his authority being effortlessly, almost contemptuously, dismissed. His humiliation was now a palpable thing, a toxic cloud spreading from the head table. Chloe looked as if she were about to be physically ill. The man she had married, the powerful titan she had admired, had just been publicly revealed as a minor princeling in the presence of a true king, and the king, for reasons they could not possibly comprehend, had chosen to align himself with the one person they had tried to cast into the shadows. The wedding planner's hasty retreat left a new kind of silence at our table. The dynamic had shifted. Silas was no longer just a mysterious stranger. He was a man who had openly and with zero effort defied the groom at his own wedding. The questions that had been swirling in my mind now demanded to be asked. "You seem to have made an impression," I said, my voice dry. "And she knew your name, Blackwood, was it?" He finally turned his full attention back to me, his eyes holding a hint of a sad, apologetic smile. "It is," he said, "Silas Blackwood, and I am the one who owes you an apology, Lena. I should have found you the moment I arrived." The use of my first name was a surprise, but it was the sound of his own that sent a jolt through my memory, a faint, echoing chime from a life I had long since left behind. Blackwood. The name was connected to my husband David, a brilliant, hungry young man he had taken under his wing years ago. You knew my husband?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Knew him?" Silas's expression softened, the hard edges of his power dissolving into a look of profound, genuine reverence. "Linda, David Maybank was more than my mentor. He was the architect of my entire life. I was a scholarship kid with a head for numbers and a chip on my shoulder the size of this building. He was the first person who saw something in me besides my anger. He gave me a job. He taught me about the market, but more than that, he taught me that integrity was the only asset that truly appreciates over time." He paused, taking a sip of water. "When I wanted to start my own firm, no one would back me. I was too young, too unknown. I went to David, not to ask for money, but for advice. The next day he called me into his office. He had a cashier's check on his desk for $250,000. He said it was not a loan, but an investment in a principle. He said, 'The world is full of men who know how to make money. I'm betting on a man who knows how to create value.'" My eyes welled with tears. I remembered that day. David had come home, filled with a quiet, certain excitement. "I just made the best investment of my life," he had told me. "I found a young man who thinks like you, Lena, with the heart of a poet and the mind of a killer." That check, Silas continued, his voice low and steady, was the foundation of everything I have built since. I tried to pay him back a dozen times over the years, but he never accepted it. He always said the same thing. "The return I want is for you to build something that lasts. Build something on rock." He looked around the opulent, superficial room, his gaze lingering for a moment on the frantic, angry face of my new son-in-law. "This," he said with a quiet, sad disdain, "this is not built on rock. I came today out of respect for David's memory," he said, his eyes meeting mine again. "And for you. He spoke of you constantly. He said you were his conscience, his true north. He said you were the one who taught him the difference between the price of a thing and its value." And I was frankly appalled to arrive here and find Lena Maybank, the queen of the Maybank legacy, hidden in a corner like a forgotten servant. It is an insult not just to you but to his entire life's work. The full, staggering truth of the situation finally settled upon me. This man was not a random stranger. He was a living testament to my husband's legacy. He was a financial titan who had built his empire on the very principles my daughter and her new husband had just so cruelly and publicly disdained. He was not just a guest at this wedding, he was its judge. The social geography of a wedding reception is as complex and unforgiving as any royal court. Power, influence, and status dictate every interaction, every seating arrangement, every conversation. The head table occupied by the bride and groom is meant to be the sun, the undeniable center of the social solar system. But the arrival of Silas Blackwood and his pointed refusal to leave my side had introduced a new, far heavier celestial body into the room, and the orbits were beginning to decay. The whispers started at the tables nearest to us, among the older, more established guests. I saw a man named Arthur Kensington, the patriarch of an old money-banking dynasty, lean over to his wife, his eyes wide with a look of stunned recognition. My God, I could almost hear him say, "Is that Blackwood?" A few tables away, a notorious real estate developer, a man who was a direct and bitter rival of Marcus's father, squinted across the room. He nudged his companion, a younger, hungrier version of himself. You see that man, in the gray suit? That's Silas Blackwood. They call him the architect. He doesn't invest in buildings, he invests in cities. If he backs your project, you get a blank check from God. If he shorts you, you might as well pack up your office and move to a new continent. The legend of Silas Blackwood, a man so reclusive he was practically a myth, was being passed in hushed reverent tones from table to table. The story was always the same. He was a ghost who moved markets, a kingmaker who operated from the shadows, a man whose quiet nod could create or destroy fortunes overnight. And this mythical creature, this financial unicorn, was sitting at the pariah's table, engaged in a quiet, intimate conversation with the bride's poorly dressed mother. The effect was immediate and profound. The center of gravity in the room began to physically shift. People who had been clamoring for a moment with the groom's father, the senator, now cast surreptitious, fascinated glances towards the back of the room. The polite, strained conversations at the surrounding tables faltered as people leaned in to whisper to their neighbors. What is he doing here? And who in God's name is that woman he's with? A few brave souls, men whose arrogance or importance gave them the courage to try, attempted to approach our table. A portly investment banker, a man I had seen on the news, made his way towards us, a broad, sycophantic smile plastered on his face. Silas, he boomed, his hand outstretched. Silas did not stand. He did not even look at the man. He simply raised his hand, a quiet, almost imperceptible gesture of dismissal, and the banker froze in his tracks, his smile collapsing, his hand dropping to his side. He retreated in a state of flustered public humiliation. The message was now unmistakably clear to everyone in the room. Silas Blackwood was not to be disturbed. He was not here to network. He was not here for the wedding. He was here for the woman at his table. The power of Marcus and the Thorne family, which had seemed so absolute just an hour before, was revealed to be what it was: provincial, second-rate, new money. They had the power of a mayor in a town that had just been visited by the king. All their carefully curated influence, all their performative importance was rendered utterly insignificant by the quiet, immovable presence of the man sitting opposite me. The whispers had confirmed it. The social solar system had a new sun, and it was located in a dark, forgotten corner at the back of the room. Marcus, blinded by his own arrogance, was the last to understand the true scale of the disaster unfolding around him. He saw the whispers, he saw the shifted attention, but he interpreted it as a temporary anomaly, a bizarre fascination with the strange man who had crashed his party. He still believed he was the main event. He strode over to his father, his face a mask of angry indignation. "Dad, who is this guy?" he demanded, his voice a low, furious hiss. "He's making a mockery of this whole evening. He's got everyone staring at the back of the room. Do something." His father, however, was not looking at his son. The senator's face was pale, his usual confident political smile replaced by a look of profound, almost fearful concern. He had been a player in the world of real power for too long not to recognize a seismic shift when he felt one. He had spent the last 20 minutes listening to the frantic whispers of his most influential donors, and he understood the situation far better than his son did. He grabbed Marcus by the arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled him aside, behind a marble column, hoping to escape the prying eyes of the other guests. "That man," the senator said, his voice a tight, controlled whisper that was far more terrifying than any shout, "is Silas Blackwood. They call him the architect. He is, without exaggeration, one of the 5 most powerful private investors on the planet. He doesn't just move markets, he creates them. The men in this room who you are trying so desperately to impress, they would crawl over broken glass for a 5-minute meeting with him." Marcus stared at his father, his own anger beginning to curdle into confusion. "So? What's he doing here, and why is he sitting with her?" "That," the senator said, his eyes narrowing, "is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? What in God's name is Silas Blackwood doing with Chloe's mother?" Marcus let out a short, dismissive laugh, a last gasp of his fading arrogance. "She's nobody," he scoffed. "A poor widow, lives in some small town upstate, sews her own clothes. She's literally a charity case." The senator looked at his son with an expression of dawning, horrified comprehension. He was beginning to understand that they had made a catastrophic, unforgivable miscalculation. "Marcus," he said, his voice now dangerously low, "you told me Chloe's family had no connections. You told me her father was a small-time university professor who left her nothing." "He was," Marcus insisted. "David Maybank, taught ethics of all things. Died 10 years ago. Left his wife a mountain of books and a good pension, and that's it. The senator's face went white. It was the color of pure undiluted terror. Maybank, he whispered, the name catching in his throat. David Maybank? You fool, you absolute arrogant fool. David Maybank wasn't just a professor, he was a legend. They called him the Saint of Wall Street. He was the founder of Maybank Capital, one of the first and most successful ethical investment funds in the world. He managed the endowments of universities of nations. He walked away from it all at the height of his power because he said the money was making people forget the meaning. He grabbed his son's shoulders, his fingers digging in like talons. And his wife? He hissed, his eyes wild with a terrible dawning clarity. His partner in everything, the financial genius who designed all their predictive models, was his reclusive, brilliant wife. Lena Maybank, a woman who supposedly controls a fortune so vast and so deeply insulated that no one even knows its true scale. A woman who for the last 10 years has been a ghost. A legend. Marcus's entire world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a pasty, sickly gray. The woman he had sneered at, the woman he had banished to the back of the room, the woman whose poverty he had feared would embarrass him, was a queen. A hidden mythical queen, whose power dwarfed his own, whose legacy made his own pathetic ambitions look like a child's sandcastle. He looked across the room, at the small quiet table in the corner. He saw the woman in the simple blue dress, and for the first time he did not see a poor relation. He saw an empress, and he saw the kingmaker sitting at her side, a loyal, powerful general who had just been reunited with his true sovereign, and he, Marcus Thorne, had just declared war on them both. Back at our table, the noise and chaos of the wedding seemed to recede, creating a small, quiet bubble of reality in a room filled with illusions. The full, staggering weight of the situation had settled upon me. Silas Blackwood was not just a man my husband had helped, he was a keeper of the flame, a living testament to the legacy David and I had built together, a legacy I had believed was all but forgotten. Silas looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound and unwavering respect. It was a look I had not seen from anyone in a very long time. It was a look that saw not the simple, quiet woman I had become, but the woman I had once been, the woman I still was, beneath the surface. David always said his greatest asset wasn't his mind for the market, Silas said, his voice a low, confidential murmur. He said it was your integrity, Lena. He said you were the one who could see the rot in a company's balance sheet just by looking at the ethics of its board of directors. You were his compass. He gestured with a subtle nod towards the head table where I could see Chloe and Marcus in a frantic, panicked huddle with Marcus's father. I came today to see if your daughter had inherited that compass. He paused, and his gaze swept over the opulent, almost vulgar display of the wedding, the mountains of imported flowers, the shimmering ice sculptures, the sheer screaming expense of it all. She has not, he concluded, the words a quiet, sad judgment. He then turned his full, intense focus back to me. The sadness in his eyes was replaced by a hard, clear-eyed resolve. This was no longer a social call. It was a council of war. They have publicly dishonored you, Lena, he said, his voice stripped of all pleasantry. It was the voice of a man accustomed to dealing with hostile takeovers and corporate betrayals. They have insulted not just you but the memory of the man who built my entire world. In my world, such actions have consequences, severe consequences. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table. He was no longer just offering comfort. He was offering a weapon. He was offering me the full, terrifying force of his own power to be wielded as I saw fit. I know men like Marcus Thorne, he continued, his voice like ice. They are hollow. Their confidence is a shell built from the approval of others, and the flow of easy money. Puncture that shell, and they collapse. I can puncture it. I can make a single phone call, and by morning the financial world he is so desperate to impress will treat him like a leper. I can ensure that every line of credit he has, every investor he is courting, will evaporate by sunrise. He held my gaze, his intensity almost overwhelming. He was giving me the power. He was not a savior, swooping in to rescue the damsel in distress. He was a loyal general, reporting to his queen, and awaiting her command. He was asking for my ruling. They have publicly dishonored you, he repeated, his voice now a quiet, dangerous whisper. What would you like me to do about it? The question hung in the air, a question of immense, terrifying weight. For a decade I had lived a life of quiet, deliberate powerlessness. I had walked away from the world of money and influence. the world of consequences and control. And now that world had found me. It was offering me a gavel, a chance to pass a final binding sentence on my own daughter for the crime of her own heartless, shallow betrayal. I looked across the room at her. I saw her face, contorted with fear and panic, not for me, but for herself, for the collapse of her social ambitions. I saw the daughter I had raised, the child I had loved, and I saw the stranger she had become. The test David and I had unknowingly set for her, the test of character, of integrity, of love over status. She had failed it, utterly. My heart, which had been aching with a profound sorrow, began to cool, to harden. The grief was still there, but it was now overlaid with a layer of cold, clear judicial resolve. The judge I had once been, the woman I had left behind, was reawakening. A crime had been committed, a judgment was required. I looked at Silas, the powerful, loyal man who had become the unexpected instrument of a judgment I hadn't even known I was ready to deliver. My decision, when it formed, was not born of anger or a desire for revenge. It was born of a terrible, crystalline clarity. It was the cold, clean logic of a judge reaching an inevitable, if painful, conclusion. "You are right," I said, my voice quiet but as firm and steady as it had ever been in a courtroom. "They are hollow men, both of them, Marcus, and the man he has taught my daughter to be." I paused, gathering my thoughts, formulating the precise nature of the sentence. "Their entire world," I continued, "the one they have chosen over family, over decency, is built on two pillars, the perception of their financial status, and the appearance of their social power. They tried to strip me of my dignity because they feared my poverty would compromise those two pillars." I met Silas's intense gaze. "So you ask me what I want you to do? The answer is simple. Let's hold a mirror up to them. Let's show them what it feels like to have the two things they value most in the world threatened. Let's take it all away." The words once spoken felt both terrible and righteous. It was not a punishment designed to inflict pain, but a lesson designed to impart a brutal, necessary truth. It was a sentence tailored perfectly to the crime. Silas did not smile. He simply gave a single sharp nod of understanding and assent. The Queen had issued her decree. The general would now execute it. He took out his phone. It was a simple, elegant device with no flashy case. He unlocked it with a touch, his movements economical and precise. He scrolled through his contacts, a list of names that could, I was certain, change the course of nations. He found the one he was looking for and tapped the screen. He did not move from the table. He did not lower his voice. He was not hiding. He was making a statement. "Michael," he said, his voice calm and conversational. "It's Silas Blackwood. I trust I'm not interrupting." He listened for a moment, a faint ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Good. I'm calling about a developer you're backing. A young man named Marcus Thorne. The Thorne Towers project." Another pause. I could imagine the man on the other end. Michael, a powerful investor in his own right, snapping to attention, his mind racing. A call from Silas Blackwood was never a casual one. "That's the one," Silas continued. "I am at his wedding, as it happens. And I have just been made aware of some character issues. A profound lack of judgment that calls his entire operational integrity into question. He has made an enemy of an old and dear friend of mine, a very, very dear friend." The threat was veiled in the polite language of business, but it was as clear and as deadly as a drawn sword. "I am no longer confident in the Thorne project," Silas said, his voice now turning to ice. "In fact, I am advising all of my associates to divest from any and all ventures connected to Thorne and his father. I am pulling my own quiet support from the municipal bonds that are underwriting his zoning permits. I am, in short, classifying him as toxic. I wanted you as a courtesy to be the first to know." He listened for another moment. "A wise decision, Michael. I knew I could count on you." He ended the call. The entire conversation had taken less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes to completely and utterly dismantle a man's entire world. The primary investor, spooked by the quiet, lethal advice of a man who was never wrong about the market, would pull his funding. The word would spread through the tight-knit world of high finance like a virus. By the end of the toast, Marcus Thorne would be a pariah. Silas placed his phone face down on the table. He looked at me, his expression unchanged. The execution had been ordered. The axe was in midair. All that was left was for the condemned to hear the whistle of its descent. As if on cue, a master of ceremonies with a painfully bright smile and a booming artificial voice stepped up to the microphone. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is the moment we've all been waiting for. Please put your hands together for our proud groom, Mr. Marcus Thorne." A wave of polite, obligatory applause rippled through the room. Marcus, who had been in a tense, furious huddle with his father, seemed to pull himself together. He plastered a confident, charismatic smile on his face, a piece of political stagecraft he had learned from his father. He was a man in the middle of a hurricane pretending it was a sunny day. He was trying to reclaim his narrative, to wrestle back control of the room that had so clearly been lost. He strode to the microphone, his walk a little too stiff, his shoulders a little too squared. He was performing the role of the triumphant groom, but it was a desperate, unconvincing performance. He tapped the microphone. "Wow," he began, his voice a little too loud. "What a night. I just want to look out at this incredible room, at all of our friends, our family, and say thank you. Thank you for being a part of the beginning of a new dynasty." He beamed at his bride, Chloe, who managed a weak, watery smile in return. She looked like a hostage trying to signal that everything was fine. "When I first met Chloe," he continued, launching into a well-rehearsed, cliché-ridden anecdote about their first date, "I knew I had met my equal. A woman of beauty, of grace, and of vision, but I also knew I had met a partner in my ambition." He turned his attention to his own family, his voice swelling with pride. "I want to thank my parents, especially my father, the senator, for teaching me that vision is nothing without the will to build it. And that is what we are celebrating tonight. Not just a marriage, but the merging of two great families. We are building an empire of luxury, a legacy of power, and a future of unparalleled success. The Thorne name will be synonymous with the very best this city has to offer." It was a speech of breathtaking arrogance, a monument to his own ego. It was all about him, his vision, his ambition, his empire, the Thorne name. He never once mentioned the Maybank family. He never mentioned my late husband. He never acknowledged my existence. In his final public address, he was completing the act of erasure he had begun when he had banished me to the back of the room. He was writing me out of my own daughter's history. As he spoke, his phone, which he had placed on the lectern, began to vibrate. A soft buzzing sound, almost imperceptible at first. He ignored it. He raised his glass. "So I ask you all to join me," he said, his voice reaching a crescendo. "To Chloe, to the Thorne family, to the future." As the guests dutifully raised their glasses, his phone buzzed again, and again. A persistent, angry, insistent vibration. He finished his speech, the confident smile now looking strained and brittle. He picked up his phone, his thumb swiping across the screen. I watched as the color drained from his face for the second time that night. The carefully constructed facade of the powerful, triumphant groom finally irrevocably cracked. He was a man who had just delivered a victory speech, only to look down and see the unconditional terms of his own surrender. As the thin, scattered applause for Marcus's speech died out, a new, more powerful silence descended upon the room. Silas Blackwood, who had been sitting in quiet repose, pushed his chair back and stood up. He did not walk to the microphone. He did not need to. His very presence was a microphone. Every eye in the room, from the bussers clearing plates to the senator at the head table, was locked on him. He held up his water glass, a simple, elegant gesture that commanded more attention than all of Marcus's booming rhetoric. "I too would like to propose a toast," Silas began, his voice calm and clear, carrying effortlessly to every corner of the silent hall. "But my toast is not to the future, it is to the past. For without a strong foundation, any future is built on sand." He turned his gaze not to the bride and groom but to our table. "To me, I would like to toast the memory of a great man," he said, his voice resonating with a deep, genuine emotion. "A man who was a giant in a world of pygmies. My mentor, and my friend, David Maybank." A collective gasp, a ripple of shocked recognition went through the older, more established guests in the room. The name, the legendary, almost forgotten name, was now spoken aloud, a ghost summoned to the feast. "David taught me that a man's worth is not measured by the size of his bank account but by the strength of his word," Silas continued, his eyes now sweeping the room. A quiet, damning indictment of the world Marcus was trying to build. He built an empire not on leverage and luxury, but on a single, unwavering principle: integrity. As Silas spoke, a new sound began to fill the room. It was the insistent, angry buzzing of Marcus's phone on the lectern. A sound that was now being echoed by the phones of half a dozen other men at the front tables. Marcus's father, his business partners, his secondary investors. A digital plague was spreading through the room in real time. Marcus, his face a mask of waxy, sweaty panic, stared at his screen, his thumb frantically scrolling through a cascade of messages that were, I knew, a real-time obituary for his career. Silas did not acknowledge the commotion. He was a master of timing. But David was not alone in his genius. He said, his voice rising slightly, drawing the room's focus back to him. His greatest partner, his secret weapon, was his brilliant and principled wife. The true architect of the Maybank legacy, a woman of such profound integrity and quiet strength, that she makes all the noise and glitter of this modern world seem cheap and hollow. The legendary Lina Maybank. He turned and looked directly at me. Every single person in the room followed his gaze. 1,000 eyes, which had so carefully avoided me all evening, were now fixed upon me. I was no longer the poor, embarrassing relation in the corner. I was the subject of the toast. I was the legend. Chloe, at the head table, let out a small, strangled sob. The full catastrophic weight of her miscalculation had finally crushingly landed upon her. Silas raised his glass high. At the same moment, Marcus let out a choked, desperate sound, a man gasping for air as the water closes over his head. The final fatal message had clearly arrived. Silas concluded his toast, his voice now like ice, his eyes fixed on the imploding groom. Some men build empires on rock, he said, the words of final devastating judgment. Others build on sand. The tide always comes in. He turned his back on Marcus and raised his glass to me. To the rock, he said. The moment Silas finished his toast, the carefully curated illusion of the perfect wedding shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Marcus Thorne, who had begun the evening as the proud, arrogant groom, was now a man in the midst of a complete and total public collapse. He stared at his phone, his mouth hanging open, a low, keening sound escaping his lips. The messages were a relentless, brutal onslaught. From Michael, his primary investor, funding pulled, all assets frozen, you're on your own. From his bank. Urgent. Your primary business credit line has been suspended pending review. From his father's chief of staff. The senator is furious. You've created a political disaster. From a partner in his flagship condo project. I'm out, Marcus. We're exercising the character clause in our contract. Don't call me. It was a financial apocalypse. Delivered via text message. The empire he had boasted about in his speech. The empire built on sand was being washed away by a digital tide. Every call Silas had made, every subtle word of warning he had whispered down the corridors of power, was now coming due. Marcus was not just losing a key investor, he was being systematically excommunicated from the world he had been so desperate to join. He looked up from his phone, his eyes wild and unseeing. He looked at Silas, who was calmly sipping his water, then at me, and then at his bride, Chloe. He was a cornered animal, looking for someone, anyone to blame for the collapse of his own hollow world. You, he hissed, his voice a ragged, ugly sound. He pointed a trembling finger at me. This is you did this. His father, the senator, moved with a swift, brutal efficiency. He strode to the lectern, grabbed his son by the arm, and began to drag him away from the microphone, away from the hundreds of watching, recording eyes. Not here, you fool, he snarled, his voice a low, furious command. You will not make this any worse than it already is. The room erupted into a chaotic murmur. Guests were standing, whispering frantically to each other, their faces a mixture of shock, morbid curiosity, and for Marcus's rivals, a barely concealed glee. The wedding reception had transformed into the most spectacular high society train wreck in recent memory. Chloe sat at the head table, frozen. A porcelain doll that had been dropped and shattered. The beautiful glittering life she had traded her mother for had just been revealed as a sham, a fantasy built on the ego of a fraud. She had not married a king. She had married a court jester who had made the fatal mistake of insulting the true sovereign, and she, in her blind, desperate ambition, had stood at his side and applauded his folly. The Thorne family was in full damage control mode, trying to hustle their imploding son out of the room. The guests, sensing the party was not just over but had become a disaster zone, began to discreetly gather their things and head for the exits. In the midst of the chaos, Silas and I remained at our table, a small island of profound, unshakable calm. The tide he had summoned had come in, and it was more powerful, more devastating than I could have ever imagined. He had not just taught Marcus a lesson, he had erased him. The dissolution of the wedding reception was a chaotic, almost frantic affair. The veneer of high society etiquette was gone, replaced by a raw, primal urge to flee a disaster. The Thorne family, a clan of political animals, moved with ruthless efficiency to contain the fallout. The senator, his face a granite mask of fury, personally escorted his now catatonic son out a side exit, while his wife directed their inner circle with the curt, precise commands of a field general managing a retreat. They were not comforting a grieving family, they were evacuating the site of a political and financial detonation, leaving the casualties behind. Marcus was financially and socially ruined. The name he had so proudly proclaimed as the foundation of a new dynasty was now synonymous with spectacular public failure. The whispers that had once been of Silas Blackwood were now about him, a chorus of schadenfreude and derision. He had committed the one unforgivable sin in his world. He had been revealed as a fool. Chloe was the primary casualty. She was left sitting alone at the vast, empty head table, a tragic figure in her impossibly expensive gown. The pearls and crystals that had seemed so glamorous just hours before now looked like the remnants of a shipwreck. Her new family had abandoned her without a second glance. Her new husband was a ghost, a fraud whose world had imploded. Her carefully constructed future had vanished, leaving behind nothing but the smoking, toxic wreckage of her own choices. As Silas and I prepared to leave, moving through the thinning crowd with a quiet, regal dignity that stood in stark contrast to the surrounding chaos, Chloe finally saw us. She staggered to her feet, her perfect hair coming undone, her face streaked with mascara. She looked like a refugee from her own life. She stumbled towards us, her hand outstretched. "Mother," she cried, her voice a raw, broken sound. "Mother, wait." I stopped. I looked at my daughter. The arrogant, dismissive stranger from the beginning of the evening was gone, replaced by a terrified, shattered child. But the child was a stranger to me now, too. She reached for my arm, her touch a desperate, pleading grasp. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't know. I didn't understand. Please, help me." Her apology was not for the cruelty she had shown me. It was not for the dishonor she had brought upon her father's memory. It was the desperate plea of a woman whose safety net had just been torn away. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was asking for a bailout. And in that moment I knew that the lesson had not yet been learned. The rot of her ambition, the disease of her values was too deep. I looked at her, and the anger, the pain, the profound sorrow of the evening coalesced into a single cold point of clarity. I felt a great terrible pity for her, but I also understood that the greatest act of love I could now show her was to let her feel the full crushing weight of her own consequences. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. I did not say a word. I simply looked into her eyes and I let her see the truth of what she had lost. I let her see the chasm that now lay between us, a chasm she herself had dug. Then, I turned, and with Silas at my side I walked away. I did not look back. I left her standing alone in the ruins of the life she had chosen, a solitary, weeping monument to her own profound and devastating betrayal. The air outside the venue was cold and clean, a welcome shock to the system after the suffocating recycled atmosphere of the party. The city lights spread out below us, a glittering indifferent tapestry, a sleek, black car, the kind that doesn't announce its expense but simply exudes it, pulled up to the curb the moment we stepped outside. A driver in a simple dark uniform held the door open. Silas and I slid into the plush leather seats. The interior of the car was silent, a sanctuary from the chaos we had left behind. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the cathedral of light and glass. It already looked like a tomb. We drove in comfortable silence for a long time, the city a blur of light and shadow beyond the tinted windows. The events of the evening were replaying in my mind, not as a triumph, but as a tragedy. I had not won. I had simply been forced to pass a terrible sentence, to act as the judge in the trial of my own daughter's character, and she had been found wanting. "She will be penniless," I said, the words spoke into the window, not to Silas, "and alone. Langston will leave her. His family will ensure it." "Yes," Silas replied, his voice gentle, "they will. He will be lucky to avoid prosecution. They will cut all ties to protect themselves. And Chloe," my voice trailed off. I had saved my own honor, I had defended my husband's legacy, but I had, in the process, utterly destroyed my child. "Chloe made a choice, Lena," Silas said, his voice firm but not unkind. "She chose a world of surfaces, of status. She made a bad investment. She will now have to learn what it means to rebuild from nothing. Perhaps in time she will find something of real value to build with. Perhaps." It was a cold comfort. The car finally pulled up in front of a magnificent, historic brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street, a part of the city I had not visited in years. "Where are we?" I asked. "This is the headquarters of the Maybank Foundation." Silas said. The charitable trust you and David established before he died. I have chaired its investment committee, as per his final wishes. It has done well. He led me inside. The interior was not a corporate office. It was a quiet, scholarly place, filled with books, art, and the gentle hum of important work being done. In the main boardroom, one wall was dominated by a large, beautifully rendered portrait. It was David. He looked out from the canvas with the same kind of quiet, intelligent warmth that I remembered so well. Beneath the portrait, on a simple, elegant plaque, was the foundation's mission statement. Words that I had written myself, a lifetime ago. True wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you contribute. It is measured not in dollars but in the integrity of your actions and the legacy of your principles. I stood there looking at my husband's face, reading the words that had been the creed of our life together. The pain of the evening began to recede, replaced by a sense of profound, sorrowful clarity. Chloe had been my daughter, my blood, but she had not been my heir. She had not understood the true nature of her inheritance. My legacy was not a bank account to be passed down. It was a set of principles to be lived up to. My path forward was now clear. My quiet, reclusive life was over. I had a duty to protect what David and I had built. Not just the money but the meaning. I turned to Silas, a new steely resolve in my eyes. We have work to do, I said. I believe it's time for me to take a more active role in the foundation. He smiled. A genuine, relieved smile. I was hoping you would say that, Lena, he said. Welcome home. The wedding was over. A future had been destroyed, but a legacy, I now knew, had just been saved. Thanks for watching.